Hey all, it's Starzy, and today I am going to be giving you some comic book recommendations. Just like with my other recommendation videos, I have 5 things to talk about today, and we're going to be avoiding any traditional DC Marvel superheroes because that can be a very intimidating thing to get into. I grew up reading comics. I was reading them since I was very young, and I still get confused with how much interlinking stuff is there. So we're not going into that, but I have 5 comic books that are all pretty accessible. I would say they're pretty accessible to anyone other than one of them, just because of the type of story it is. But otherwise, yeah, I think they're all pretty accessible stories, whether you are an avid comic book reader already or not. So that's what we have today. I think I'll start off with one of the most well-known and popular comic book series, just to get that out of the way first. And that is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, I believe is the illustrator. Do not expect me to tell you all the creators' names for these, because in most cases I don't know it. But this is the comic book series that I'm going to talk about today that I've probably read the most of, and that I started the longest ago, because I had digital subscription to this, so I was reading them as they came out many years ago now. But what this is a sci-fi comic book series following this couple who are essentially on opposite sides of a war is where they come from, and so everyone's not very happy about them being together, and the series starts off with them having a child, and things kind of go from there. And there's a lot going on in this series. There's a lot of diverse, interesting characters. There's war, love, like both family love and romance and friendships, and just so much. And I just really love this series a lot. I'm actually not completely up to date, I don't think, but I need to do that. Also, this is volume 6 because I didn't want to hold up my huge bind-up. This is also one of my favorites in terms of art style. The story, characters, and art and everything is just really good in this series. It's also quite an adult one. There's extreme violence and occasional nudity, so that is also something to be aware of, but it's good stuff. If sci-fi isn't really your thing, but you're into fairy tale retellings, Fables is a comic book series that is fairy tale characters kind of trapped in our modern world, and kind of their interactions. And this first volume has a bit of a murder mystery going on, and you've got like the big bad wolf and Snow White and Belle and Beast, and you get to see kind of how all of their stories have progressed into this world in this interpretation, and it's quite kind of gritty and almost noir at points, but I really enjoy this. And it's also what the video game The Wolf Among Us was based on, which is a good fun video game which I played first, and which made me want to get into this. So if you like those kind of grittier real world fairy tale retellings, that's kind of what this is. And you've also got other elements like the fairy tale characters who aren't human enough to pass in our world get sent off to a farm, but there's this one pig who doesn't want to do that, and so he keeps showing up on Bigby's door, who is the big bad wolf. It's an interesting one. I've said it many times before, I just love fairy tale retellings because no matter how many retellings I read, they're often so different from each other, and it's just really interesting to see how different people interpret them, and the more different they are, the more interesting it is. And this is just, yeah, really interesting way of seeing these fairy tales. And it's also one of those things of like, sometimes just trying to work out who everyone's meant to be. One of the comic books that I have read the most recently, because I read it in December, I read the first volume of Rat Queens. So this is one where I've only read the first volume, but I fell in love with it immediately, so I'm still going to recommend it. And this one is a fantasy comic book series, so think classic fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons. It's also quite a humorous comic book. It's got your range of characters who are kind of different classes and all of that kind of good stuff, and you are following a group of women and their kind of misadventures and trying to work out kind of what the deeper plot is and what's really going on. And I was just immediately drawn to all the characters. Again, this one had just gorgeous art, and all of the characters were really interesting in their own right, and I really want to learn more about them, so it's definitely something I need to get my hands on the next volumes. I love humorous fantasy. I enjoy playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it's got that same kind of vibe. And so, yeah, beautiful art, fun characters, a bit of humor, and also some good old violence, as you'd expect from that type of fantasy. And yeah. Also queer. This definitely had queer characters. Yeah. Around the same time, I also read Zodiac Star Force, which I have read 2 volumes of now. This is one which I'm not sure it necessarily quite makes it onto my like favorite comic book series, but it is one that's very accessible to kind of anyone and everyone, I feel. And it's another one where the art is beautiful, and this one is really fun and colorful, both in art style and in concept, because this is a comic book series that follows a group of magical girls, and they are kind of that their whole shtick is that they're kind of centered around zodiac signs. So, you know, one is Taurus, etc., etc. So it's really a really fun concept. I just love magical girls. I really love magical girls, and I loved the art and the color. I love bright colors, and so it was really aesthetically pleasing in that way, and probably one of the more unique comic book series I've read in terms of art style, because it has such a unique it is so uniquely colorful in the way most other comic books I've read aren't, just like its general color scheme. So that's all fun. And yeah, again, probably not quite, it doesn't quite get up there into my favorites, but it was just fun and sweet, and there were more queer characters in this, and you also had some representation in various other ways. And yeah, it was just kind of a wholesome one, while also having some slightly darker stuff going on, because what would it really be magical girl media if it wasn't light and fluffy on the outside, but some dark shiz going on the inside? That's it's kind of a thing that happens. So yeah, I would still recommend that. Then the last one I'm going to talk about is a series that I love, but I know a lot of people don't. So it's pretty much the one series on this list that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone. I feel like all the others are pretty accessible, other than some being a bit adult. But otherwise, I feel like they're pretty accessible stories overall, and they have kind of widespread appeal. But Monstrous is one that I've seen a lot of people don't like because they think it's confusing and not enough's explained. And I also know a lot of people wouldn't necessarily like it because it is a dark fantasy with horror themes, and it does get a bit gruesome and dark at times. So wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone, but if you like that weird dark stuff, and this one also is just gorgeous. Art is gorgeous. I love dark horror stuff. There are some interesting characters going on here. Like, Kipper is like the most precious character in this whole series. So cute and wholesome. And yeah, there's also a lot of interesting stuff to kind of unpack with the world and what's going on. And as I said, I've seen a lot of criticisms of people thinking not enough's explained, but I kind of almost, like, it doesn't bother me just from how I've grown up reading in general. I'm kind of used to having to infer a lot, or just kind of make my own assumptions about things. But two, I also find it kind of interesting in that way of, I might not necessarily know exactly what's going on or exactly what this world is, but I'm enjoying kind of piecing it together book by book. So yeah, something to be aware of, that not everything is explained up front, and this does get very dark at times. You know, you've got things like cannibalism and, you know, just very gory scenes and talk of like slavery and stuff like that. Like, yeah, it's an intense one, but I love it. I don't think I've actually given a synopsis for this other than weird horror fantasy. But you're following this girl here who has something kind of dark inside her, and she's kind of trying to learn what that is, and other people seem to be wanting to get to her too, perhaps because of this. And again, you're kind of learning more about the world as you go on. There's also talking cats in this, and what's interesting is some of the world building you do get at the end of each like issue is actually the cats telling you some stuff, because they're like, I guess, the historians of the world. So it just has a lot of elements that really appeal to me. So I really love this one. So there you have it. Those are the 5 recommendations I have for you today. Whether you would like a kind of space opera, sci-fi. Is it a space opera? I don't read very much. I've never consumed very much sci-fi, so I don't really know the subgenres, but it is a sci-fi with a lot going on, and I love Saga. If you want a sci-fi, gritty fairy tale retellings, magical girls, dark horror fantasy stuff, or your humorous kind of high fantasy story, those are some recommendations for you. Let me know if there are any other kind of specific recommendations, whether it's comic book related or general book related, that you would like to see, because I've only made a few of these recommendation videos. I've done queer recommendations and I've done horror recommendations. I don't think I've done any others, but it is something I will do, however inconsistently. So let me know if there's anything specifically you would like 5 recommendations on. All that out the way, let me know if you've read any of these comic books, or whether you're interested in reading any of these comic books. Let me know one of your favorite comic books or graphic novels, and I'll talk to you next time, I guess. Stay safe, stay educated, and Starzy out.